Hello, Hextech heroes and Undercity antagonists. My name is TV Skyn, and, so Arcane was pretty good. It's reviewed really well, people seem to like it, and excitingly, it has ignited the League of Legends fanfiction community, which is good news for everyone who wanted Victor and Jace to kiss. And if all you want to know from this review is whether the show is worth your time and you should watch it, I will save you time and tell you, yes, it is very, very good. It has the production values of a Pixar movie without any of the cloying Disney wholesomeness defanging its story. It is absolutely worth your time. Go watch it. If you stick around here, we're gonna get into spoilers. If, on the other hand, you want to know my more specific opinions on the show, parts of it are really good, there's a lot of production value, but frankly, some of it is completely underdeveloped, and it relies a lot on being such an unrelenting roller coaster that you don't stop and realize that some of it is kind of shallow. Call it a 7 out of 10. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, support my Patreon, and... Okay, now that the people who are going to get angry about the numbers I put on screen have stopped watching the video in order to leave comments about why those numbers are the wrong numbers, and thank you for the engagement, by the way, it really helps the algorithm, let's talk about what I mean by 7 out of 10. That's what review scores are, by the way. They're a way to generate engagement. There's nothing people love to argue over like review scores, which is good both for YouTube hacks like myself and websites like Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic. Drives a lot of traffic, don't you know? But review scores are fundamentally pretty meaningless because they don't really correspond very well to actual human experience. For example, this is Insomniac's Marvel's Disney's PS4's Spider-Man, a massive budget AAA showcase title working with one of the most lucrative IPs in the world. It has enormous production values, incredibly tight controls, deeply satisfying traversal, a compelling story, huge replay value, incredibly impressive visuals and animation, and a fantastic soundtrack. It really makes you feel like Spider-Man. It is, by most conventional measures, a 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 video game. It is fantastic. This, on the other hand, is Ring of Red, a PS2-era mid-range tactical RPG from Konami. It has a mediocre translation, clunky controls, an obtuse interface, uneven game balance, low-quality graphics, an unremarkable soundtrack, and to be quite honest, rather questionable politics. It is, by any measure, a 6 out of 10 video game. But I have played through Marvel's, Disney's, The Avengers, the MCU's, PS4's Spider-Man exactly one time, which took some 15 hours. And I have sunk hundreds of hours into Ring of Red, and I'm currently on probably my 50th replay of that game. The human experience does not line up well with review scores. We respond to art in different and unpredictable ways, influenced by everything from our education to nostalgia to whether we've had our coffee this morning or not. So when I say that Arcane, to me, is a 7 out of 10 show, what I mean isn't that it doesn't deserve a 100% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't mean that anyone who calls it a 10 out of 10 is wrong, and I'm genuinely not trying to be edgy or contrarian. What I mean is that different people respond to art in different ways, and just as, to me, the 6 out of 10 Ring of Red is a more compelling video game than Marvel's, Disney's, Sony's, The Avengers, the MCU's, PS4's 9 out of 10 Spider-Man, to me, the 10 out of 10 certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes Arcane, an absolutely amazing show by any reasonable metric, feels like a 7 out of 10. To explain why, we have to dive a little bit deeper right after I segue awkwardly to the sponsor of this video, NordVPN. If you've been on YouTube the past few years, you've probably seen ads for VPNs around. Virtual private networks are services that encrypt your internet traffic, allowing you to make decisions about where and how your data is seen, and decisions about where and how you want various websites to perceive your traffic. If a certain feature on a website is geo-locked, for example, not available in your region, a quick switch with NordVPN will let you tell that website that you are browsing from an approved location and access the content. So whether you're trying to read articles on websites that insist on blocking you for living in Europe where the GDPR data protection laws prevent them from harvesting your data, or trying to watch your favorite series on a streaming platform that insists on locking it away from you for living in the wrong country, or trying to game on a server that geo-restricts its access, a few clicks in NordVPN can help you out. NordVPN also boasts features like DDoS protection, malware blocking, increased browser security, and best-in-class encryption. And right now, you can go to NordVPN/Skyen to get a 2-year plan plus 1 full month for free at a heavy Cyber Monday discount. That's NordVPN/Skyen, and you can find those links in the description and in the pinned comment below. Thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Hey, just a quick note. Just as it would be irresponsible right now to talk about Activision Blizzard products without mentioning the horrifying abuses that company has subjected its workers to, it remains best practices to keep in mind that while the workers and creatives at Riot are producing absolutely fantastic work, that company has a similar history of abusing women and marginalized people in its workforce and has vigorously resisted all attempts to hold the leadership of the company accountable in public and in court. I know it's a downer, but the workers of these companies need your solidarity, and the first part of solidarity is to know. Okay, so Arcane is a 7 out of 10 show to me. Let me try and explain how that works. And as I've said, this is not necessarily for rational reasons. Art very rarely is rational, and to demonstrate how not rational it is, I'm going to say the following sentence. Arcane is a 7 out of 10 show to me because it's just too good. I know. Just bear with me a second. I know. So, Arcane is visually immaculate. Studio Fortiche has poured blood, sweat, tears, and actual sorcery into every frame of this show, giving it not only some of the best character animation you or I have ever seen in an animated series, but a level of visual storytelling that is frankly going to take me months of rewatching the series to fully unravel and understand. The phrase, every frame a painting, is thrown around a lot, but Arcane is one of the few pieces of film that kind of deserves it. The show makes incredibly careful, deliberate, and artistically interesting decisions about how to frame every character in every major shot of the series. One standout scene for me, for example, is Caitlyn investigating the raid aboard the airship smuggling drugs into Piltover. The scene is entirely wordless, with the motion of the camera slipping in and out of Caitlyn's perspective and carefully highlighting the elements in the environment that she's noticing, allowing us to follow her thinking and replicate her deductions. Most shows about Sherlock Holmes can't resist having a character monologue in detail about all the little things they've noticed to wow the viewer with how clever they are, or put text or video game UI elements on screen to beat the mechanics of deduction into your head with a cudgel. Arcane shows us, with clarity and absolute confidence, exactly how Caitlyn deduces the things she does and establishes her as a competent investigator without ever needing a simpering side character to gush over how clever she is. The visual storytelling in this show is amazing. It is also incredibly diverse. It begins as a sort of Goonies vibe kids adventure show with a bunch of street kids going on heists, running from the cops, and fighting a scary underground villain. Then it swerves brutally into political crime drama and sticks the landing with a full ascent into high fantasy action, and it navigates these genres both smoothly and with a self-awareness of how swerving from one to the other can be used to heighten the impact of its story beats. Act 1 of the show plays out fully by the kids' adventure story playbook, with escalating stakes that culminate in all of the kids mounting a rescue of their adopted father from a menacing villain's lair. The show fully commits to the classic tropes of showing how each of the kids contribute in their own way and how by working together they're able to successfully rescue their family, beat the villain, and escape to a happy conclusion. Vi holds off the bad guys, Milo lockpicks, Clagger finds a way out, and Powder's inventions that have never worked before and couldn't help anyone finally work the way they're supposed to. But just as the tropes of the genre demand a moment of elated triumph, Arcane pulls the rug out from under you and everything goes straight to hell. It kills 3 important and well-established characters and heartbreakingly tears the family of Vi and Powder apart to heighten the stakes for its second act, and it is brilliantly effective. Similarly, the show, for the most part, operates on a painterly 3D animated aesthetic with 2D animated flourishes. It's a style that's fairly solidly established in contemporary 3D animation, especially games-related animation. But then, in episode 7, with the reintroduction of Echo and his fight with Jinx, the show, without a shred of awkwardness, flips into a highly stylized, limited animation style, deeply soaked in punk and hip-hop aesthetics, and then flips straight back out of them again once the moment for those aesthetics have passed. It's a little jarring, but it's compelling, and it's confidently executed, and it's an exhilarating burst of variety, calibrated specifically to fit the character that it is used for. Similarly, Jinx, when she's murderous, is often framed with straight-up horror aesthetics, while scenes with Mel and Jace are shot and staged fully like political dramas. The ability to merge these disparate styles of aesthetics into a cohesive whole is frankly a joy to behold. The character animation that underpins all of this is not just good, but premium. By which I mean, plenty of shows have great animation some of the time. Castlevania, also on Netflix, comes to mind. That show has some of the most electrifying action animation you are likely to ever see. But it also has a limited budget, and so things like low-stakes dialogue scenes and exposition are executed with extremely limited animation and largely static shots. This is not a knock against Castlevania. The show is doing a fantastic job of managing its budget, but what makes Arcane premium is that it has the resources to invest every scene in the show with the same detail and quality as its highest impact action scenes. It comes away with a sense less of being a serialized season of animation and more being a 6-hour feature film released in 9 episodic installments. Riot Games and Fortiche, the animation studio that handled the series, clearly put everything into this show. Money, time, skill, and effort, and it is all spectacularly on display. This is, in my mind, unquestionably the highest production value season of animation I have ever seen. It is endlessly impressive and incredibly rewarding to slow down and analyze. If you frame by frame your way through this show, there will always be something interesting to see. The character stories that are told with all of that animation budget are similarly incredibly well executed. Arcane is fundamentally, at least in Season 1, the story of Powder and how she transforms from a traumatized street kid into the primal force of chaos in Piltover's undercity known as Jinx. The story of her transformation touches on and is influenced by a network of other narratives. Jason Victor inventing the hex tech that causes Jinx's greatest tragedy, Caitlyn returning her sister to her when it's far too late to heal from the wounds of the past, Silco, who murdered her family, taking her on as his own adopted daughter, and so on. Arcane juggles these and half a dozen other storylines on an incredibly compressed timeline. I said this show feels like a 6-hour movie, but it contains enough plot and characters to power at least another 2 or 3 similar 6-hour movies. And again, the sheer level of visual production available to the show does a lot of the heavy lifting of making all of this work. A perfect clarity of visual language makes the plot possible to follow, and fills in so much of the underlying details and world building that the show itself simply doesn't have time to establish explicitly. The show has 100 plot threads, but it weaves them together into a tapestry where everything, somehow, against all odds, manages to fit and hold together, and where as an audience you can follow and understand everything that is happening, regardless of your prior knowledge of these characters. Which is another one of Arcane's impressive accomplishments, by the way. People who have never played a game of League of Legends, never read the stories of these characters, and never engaged with the universe of Runeterra, have been able to pick up the show and follow it, be drawn in by it, and fall in love with it, because the show, on its own, presents such a cohesive, self-contained, and interconnected set of stories and characters that the wider lore of League of Legends becomes an enriching little cherry on top without ever interfering. Did you know that in this scene, Benzo is assessing the Heart of Gold, an item you used to be able to buy in-game in League of Legends that granted your character increased passive gold generation? Did you know that this mask is actually Liandry's Torment, an item that makes your spells more powerful and causes burn damage over time? You don't need to know. And you don't need to know about the many chemical weapons of mass destruction that Singed has supplied to Noxus. You don't need to know about how Victor is destined to become an inhuman cyborg prophet of the glorious evolution. You don't need to know that Echo will one day invent time travel, or even that Heimerdinger is a Yordle from the magical realm of Bandle City that exists outside of linear time, and in fact is able to command the forces of magic himself if he wants to, which is why he understands exactly how willful and dangerous magic can be. These things are optional extras. The show never punishes you for not knowing them beforehand, but it rewards any fans who know enough to spot them. And that is an incredibly difficult tightrope to walk when you're working with a massive pre-established IP like League of Legends. Arcane is, by any reasonable metric, a 10 out of 10 show. It is an accomplishment from every angle. It is a triumph of visual storytelling and an incredibly engaging and rewarding character piece from start to finish. Everything that is in Arcane is f***ing amazing. Everything that's in there is impressive and genuinely wonderful. The things that aren't there on the other hand. You know, if Arcane had been a lesser show, if everything about it hadn't been so premium, if the animation and framing and aesthetics and character writing hadn't been so damn good, if it hadn't been so masterful in its visual storytelling, it probably wouldn't have been a 7 out of 10 show to me. Because the problem is that the closer you approach perfection, the more painfully present and distracting the imperfections become. Ring of Red is in most ways a mediocre game, and because of that, I forgive it for a lot of things that I would never permit in Marvel's, Disney's, Stan Lee's, Steve Ditko's, The Avengers, the MCU's, PS4's 9 out of 10 Spider-Man. Arcane is a near-perfect show, and because of that, the few things about it that just aren't as good as they should be are nails down the blackboard of my very soul. And the major sin that Arcane commits is rushing. Not that any part of the show is rushed, it's not. There's effort and craft in every frame of its runtime, but the show itself is rushing. Arcane is a show with 27 episodes of plot crammed into 9 episodes of just under 40 minutes each. Each 3-episode arc is an entire season's worth of story, and while it is incredibly impressive that Arcane managed to cram so much into such a short amount of time and make it all stick together somehow, there's no way to do that without making cuts. Let me give you an example. In episode 3, everything is about to go to hell. Silco has sprung his trap, murdered Benso and Sheriff Grayson, and taken Vander to his spooky lair to do villain monologues and shimmer poison at him. Vi links up with Clagger and Milo, her adoptive family, and when Powder adorably insists on coming along to help because it's her family too, Vi has to shut her down and say, "No, it's too dangerous, you're not ready for it, and I'm scared that I'm gonna lose you. I love you too much, I can't risk it." In the next scene that we see Powder, she is not only sad or despondent about this, she is in a full-on violent meltdown, tearing the heads off her toys, throwing things around, screaming, and attacking herself in rage and frustration. In the show so far, Powder has been a moody kid, often frightened, and her character design sells her as frazzled and a bit fragile, but nothing in her behavior so far has suggested that she is this volatile and prone to fits of violent outbursts. If anything, she's usually just quiet and sad. Now, because the storytelling in the show is so good, we as an audience can infer that, okay, she's traumatized by the loss of her parents, her sister is the only real emotional anchor she has in the world, now the family's in danger and she feels abandoned, which is one of the greatest terrors to a kid like that. Okay, we can backfill the details here, we can sort of fill it in ourselves. And because Powder's mental state pays off over and over and over again over the course of the show, the fact that it didn't spend a lot of time setting it up here is probably okay. It's a flaw, a small flaw, and it's probably not that big a deal on its own. So let's look at another example. In the very first episode where he is introduced, Jace, over the course of about 20 minutes of screen time, goes from an optimistic and idealistic young inventor who enjoys the confidence of Heimerdinger and seems emotionally deeply committed to making the world a better place any way he can, to attempting suicide from the deepest depths of despondent despair. He can't keep his mouth shut at his trial, he's expelled, and when his mother saves him from exile, he treats her like she has violently betrayed him somehow and says, "If my own family won't help me, I will find someone who will." Which, okay, he's determined to still pursue his dream even though the way has been shut to him. But then after exactly one visit to Caitlyn's house, he's like, "Well, I'm out of ideas, time to commit suicide." Now, as an audience, we can backfill that, alright, what we're meant to take away from this is that Jace has gone everywhere and talked to everyone and tried everything he can to find a way to pursue his dream. And now, finally, he's completely out of options and he sees only despair in front of him, and therefore, he can't face the thought of living a life where he can't pursue his most important dream. Okay, we can backfill that. But all we see as an audience is that he's a dick to his mom, he gets rained on outside of Caitlyn's house, and then he just gives up. He didn't want to go see Heimerdinger, who sympathizes with him, try and get a hold of one of the counselors to get the decision reversed, talk to a friend, contact his family's business partners. They own factories, don't they have, isn't there someone he could go to? And it's not that it doesn't make sense for Jace to eventually succumb to total despair. It's just that the show is in such a hurry to get along to the next plot point where Victor gives him the lifeline he needs to return to hope, which becomes the core of their relationship, that it just doesn't really have time to develop or flesh out Jace's descent into hopelessness, or really dig into why this hex tech dream is so important to him that he would commit suicide at being denied access to it. We get the flashback that once upon a time a mage saved his life, and therefore now he's really obsessed with magic, which, okay, we can backfill the details there, but it never really goes in depth with it. And one of the consequences of that is that Jace's relationship with his mother, his only living family, whose near death is what inspired him to pursue Hextech in the first place, a woman who's surely pretty important to this major character's personality and psychology, is never developed beyond the very most basic of supportive mom worried about her son story beats. And again, on its own, this is probably fine. We can fill it in, we can infer, it all pays off really nicely, and ultimately it is a good story. But you see what I mean, right? The show is often asking us to imagine depth in its plot and character relationships, to fill in the details based on the tropes, to make assumptions about what must have happened between the major plot beats without ever really showing us. When Echo and Jinx fight on the bridge, the show launches into an incredibly stylish, cool music video, flipping back and forth between the two as children and now as adults, letting us know that they've had this fight before 100 times as innocent children playing in the streets of the Undercity. It is meant to heighten the moment, to illuminate the tragedy of how time has torn their found family apart. But here's a fun fact. In Act 1 of the show, when they're all kids, Powder never talks to Echo. They don't meet, they don't interact, they don't play. When their relationship comes to blows on the bridge, they might as well be strangers for all that Arcane has bothered to actually show us. Yes, we can infer. Yes, we can fill it in. Yes, we can do the work of actually tying their stories together. But it would have been a lot better if the show had done it instead. And the most egregious example of this, at least for me, is the story of Skye, Victor's assistant who's in love with him, even though he never really notices her. Skye is first introduced as a nameless background character. She gets a couple of voice lines to suggest that she's interested in Victor. She gets one flashback scene where she looks at him while they're both kids for about 5 seconds. And then the show builds up this massively suspenseful and tragic moment where this character, who we never really got to spend any time with, is brutally murdered for the purposes of making Victor sad and heightening the stakes of his Hextech obsession. It's a classic case of fridging, where a character exists primarily to be brutalized so that someone else can feel big emotions about how sad it is, and it's kinda cheap, honestly. It's one of the only parts of Arcane that I think genuinely fully sucks. Like, I think this is pretty poor writing. The show, in its rush, performs the absolute bare minimum set of gestures to make Skye a character, like more than an extra, and then in the very last moments before she's killed, it pulls out of its ass that she's actually an aspiring scientist and an inventor, and that this whole time in the background, where we didn't see it because the show didn't bother spending any time developing her character, she's been working on a project of her own, inspired by Victor's dedication to making the world a better place. Ah, how tragic that she dies. How keenly do we feel that loss, and Victor himself obviously is completely broken by her death because he cared about her deeply. She was actually important to him. The show never bothered to show us any of this or to develop any kind of a relationship between these two characters. It just kind of expects us to backfill that Skye is definitely a real character with real depth who has real relationships with other characters in the show. Just trust us. And when she dies, that's supposed to be a big shock and scary and very sad, and ooh, we're supposed to be very scared about what the Hex Core is doing to our precious science boy. Now again, Arcane is a really good show. Almost everything in it is perfect. It writes tragedies like this that hit like a ton of bricks. Compare the death of Skye to the deaths of Vander or Milo or Clagor or even Silco. These are all handled with development, gravitas, and care, and when they die, we feel what those losses mean to the characters who suffer their absence, because we are suffering their absence as well. And so, in a lesser show, a show that wasn't as good at telling these kinds of stories everywhere else, I probably wouldn't have been bothered that much by the fridging of Skye. Like, it wouldn't have been great, but it probably wouldn't have stuck with me that much. In Arcane, though, this one thing that sucks sticks with me. It sticks with me a lot because I am painfully, overwhelmingly aware that the show can do so much better. Arcane has written characters and character deaths with depth and interest. It has created fantastic tragic storylines. So when it decides to not do that, that stings. Sky and her massively abbreviated story read to me like an obvious cut for time. I think there was a much more developed story there at some point, like they bothered showing her in the flashback, so I think she was probably meant to play a bigger role at some point, to have a real relationship with Victor, and be a real character whose story could have contributed meaningfully to the themes of Arcane beyond just using her as a victim. So yeah, Arcane is a show that rushes. It rushes breathlessly from plot point to plot point, story development to story development. It is a roller coaster. At its best, which is most of the time, the show is all killer, no filler. It cuts the fat, and it gets to the point, and it offers more value per minute of watch time than pretty much any other entertainment media you can spend your time on these days. At its worst, on the other hand, it throws a shallow 1/10 of a storyline at your face and tells you to fill in the rest of it yourself. It shows you the loop-de-loop and expects you to just assume that all the scaffolding required to support it is definitely down there somewhere. Don't worry about it, just enjoy the ride. I feel somewhat similarly about the ending of Season 1. After all the rushing that Arcane did, its mad dash to get all of its storylines on the board and in motion and just cram them into 9 episodes of TV, its insistence that all of this has to happen now, it can't wait, and we can't take any time to develop the shallower bits. At the end of the season, it turns out that Arcane can't actually resolve all the storylines that they crammed in there. It turns out that there are actually too many balls in the air, too many plot lines in motion, and it can't get to a satisfying conclusion for most of them. At the end of the first season, only one storyline is really resolved, which is how Powder transforms into Jinx. And this is resolved absolutely fantastically. Jinx's relationship with her two families is an incredibly clever synecdoche for the relationship between Piltover and Zaun as a whole. It's a thematic representation of the depths of hurt that the corruption of Piltover has inflicted on the Undercity and how impossible wounds can be to heal, even when there's every reason to want them to. But everything besides that, everything else is left as a cliffhanger. Everything else is to be continued, TM. When the show has cut so many things for time, when it has been so quick and desperate and insistent of stuffing itself full of plots and stories, when you reach the end of the season only to find that despite all the cutting, despite all those little unsatisfying moments of shallowness that we've been glossing over, that it still couldn't find time to resolve its storylines, I gotta tell ya, it didn't feel great. And all of these things together mean that Arcane feels to me, emotionally, like a 7 out of 10. Because the extremely high bar for quality that it sets for itself means that small flaws end up feeling like big missteps. Perhaps Season 2 will fill some of these things in, take a little bit more time, not be in such a rush to tell 3 seasons worth of story in a single 9-episode run. I certainly hope so, and I know for a fact that the creative team behind it are more than capable. I'm deeply excited for Arcane Season 2, and I will be spending months analyzing what I love about Season 1. But to me, Season 1 feels like a 7 out of 10. I don't want anyone to put that score on Metacritic. I don't want to see it in some review roundup list article. It's just that every time I think about the series and try to put a number to my feelings about it, that's the number that comes up. It is so good that the ways in which it falls short are that much more heartbreaking. Anyway, feel free to go argue with that 7 out of 10 number in the comments if you want to, but I'm a lot more interested to hear about what you thought were the flaws with the show and how you feel about them. What did this near-perfect show do that you didn't quite vibe with, and how much does it affect of what you think of it? Or you can just go gush about how cool the show is. You're welcome to do that too, because I agree with you. Thank you very much to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Once again, you can use the URL nordvpn/skyen to get a great Cyber Monday deal on 2 years plus 1 free month of NordVPN. Hey, thank you very much for watching. I'm taking a little bit of a risk with this video framing it the way that I did, because there's nothing people like to argue with like numbers. I debated with myself whether just to leave out the score entirely, but yeah, no, I think it was the best way to communicate how I feel. It's a 10 out of 10 show that feels like a 7 out of 10, because small mistakes feel big when compared to perfection. I hope that comes across, because otherwise moderating the comments is gonna suck. Anyway, this video is sponsored, so I won't do a lot of self-promotion, except to say that I have a Let's Play channel where I'm playing the Ruined King game and some Legends of Runeterra right now, and a Shorts channel where I upload bite-sized quick hot takes on things like League of Legends skins and Pokemon. You can subscribe to those if you want to, and if you don't want to, hey, just stick around here. Thanks for watching. Remember to wear a mask and wash your hands. Yes, I know, even still. Take such vaccines as are necessary, and try to act with solidarity towards those who are worse off than yourself.